this morning comes from Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. We're in chapter 2, verses 1 through 17. I'll be reading from the Common English translation. If you prefer to follow along in another translation, you can find it on the versions in your pews. The Revised Standard Version is 1004. The New International Version is page 1237. Now hear the word of the Lord. So I decided that for my own sake, I wouldn't visit you again while I was upset. If I make you sad, who will be there to make you glad when you are sad because of me? That's why I wrote this very thing to you, so that when I came, I wouldn't be made sad by the ones who ought to make me happy. I have confidence in you that my happiness means your happiness. I wrote to you in tears, with a very troubled and anxious heart. I didn't write to make you sad, but so you would know that the overwhelming love that I have for you. But if someone has made anyone sad, that person hasn't hurt me, but all of you to some degree, not to exaggerate. The punishment handed out by the majority is enough for this person. This is why you should try your best to forgive and to comfort this person now instead, so that this person isn't overwhelmed by too much sorrow. So I encourage you to show your love for this person. This is another reason why I wrote to you. I wanted to test you and see if you are obedient in everything. If you forgive anyone for anything, I do too. And whatever I forgive it, if I forgive in anything, I did it for you in the presence of Christ. This is so that we won't be taken advantage of by Satan, because we are well aware of his schemes. When I came to Troas to preach Christ's gospel, the Lord gave me an opportunity to preach. But I was worried because I couldn't find my brother Titus there. So I said goodbye to them and went to Macedonia. But thank God, who is always leading us around through Christ, as if we were in a parade. He releases the fragrance of the knowledge of him everywhere through us. We smell like the aroma of Christ's offering to God, both to those who are being saved and to those who are on the road to destruction. We smell like a contagious dead person to those who are dying, but we smell like the fountain of life to those who are being saved. Who is qualified for this kind of ministry? We aren't like so many people who hustled the word of God to make a profit. We are speaking through Christ in the presence of God as those who are sincere and as those who are sent from God. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. So we've just read just a little bit. We started, I know some of you are why did we start in verse 2? We're going to start chapter 2. We're going to start in chapter 2 and we're going to end our series at the end of the summer in chapter 1. So feel free to read any of it on your own whenever you like. You can read whatever part of the Bible. So this church we just read about, right, they got some issues going on. When we read a letter like this, I think it's always important to know that we're missing a lot of the important information, right? So we don't have any of the letters that Paul received, right? Paul could have been receiving like an official letter from the church. He could have also been receiving like multiple letters from individuals, right? Complaining about certain things here and there. We don't really know, right? We also know Paul was part of the problem, right? He makes it clear that he disappointed them. I don't know if you've heard it, but he disappointed them. He didn't show up when he said he was going to. He said he was going to visit, and then his plans changed, and he didn't show up. And then it seems like, I mean, again, I'm not really sure, but it seems like one person, or maybe more, had created kind of a storm out of Paul not showing up, Paul disappointing them, right? And that person, that storm, had created some anger and hurt in their church community, right? It's very much like us gathering here, right? So I or Aaron or Nathan, we disappoint you, we anger you, whatever, and then one of you takes it personally, and then you decide to, I'm going to tell all these people, and I'm going to create like a little net of people who agree with me, and then we're all going to be mad at Beth together, right? That's essentially what was happening with Paul, we think, based on what we're reading, right? So the storm has created this anger and hurt, and it appears that Paul knows at least one person, but then he takes great pains, I don't know if you noticed, to not name the person specifically. He just keeps saying, and that person, that one person, you should forgive that one. He says it so many times, that person, which you're like, just say the name already. It's just easier to read if you would tell us the name, right? But Paul doesn't do that. He doesn't like out the name exactly. But I think we can assume that the church, when they heard the letter, knew what he was talking about, right? So So we know also that Paul is upset, and he doesn't want to visit them while he knows that they're upset, because they will make him sad, is what it says, right? And like, what use is a sad pastor when I read it, right? And so I gotta say, I read this and I think, Paul, come on now. We don't always get to be in happy situations. That's just not life, right? I mean, if me or Pastor Aaron or Nathan only interacted with you when things were going well, imagine if that was our goal. Oh, well, I'm not calling that person. They're upset today. I don't understand. How come Paul gets to do this, right? Paul needs to learn a little bit about sticking it out with people when they're having problems, because people have problems, Paul. That's what I want to tell him. Here's another thing. I'm going to let you in on a little pastor secret. Pastors are taught that we must always have a non-anxious presence. Regardless of feelings or issues going on in church life, committees, small groups, interpersonal relationships, illnesses, whatever, the pastor is supposed to always be non-anxious. And so at first when I was reading Paul's argument for staying away from them, I think, you know what, Paul? You need to go to seminary where they teach you to be not anxious. Paul needs to figure it out. And then, of course, I began to remember all of the times that I was not non-anxious, right? I mean, how many times in meetings have I not been able to hold my tongue? Or how many times when people are disagreeing about what we should do or where we should put our money or what our new building should look like, have I actually been visibly bothered? I remember that I, or any human for that matter, right, can never always be non-anxious. Relationships actually make us anxious, right? Relationships are hard. I remember a conversation that I had with John Cantor's father. It's at least 6 years ago now. We were walking through the inside of this sanctuary. John had invited an architect to come and see the sanctuary, and then he invited his dad, I think just to come along for fun. And at the meeting we were wondering, at the time, we were wondering whether we should rebuild or we should repair or rebuild, right? And so after we had talked through it all together, we were actually walking out of the sanctuary and we were locking the doors, and John's dad turns to me and he says, you know, Beth, this is a building problem, not a people problem. Building problems are nothing compared to people problems. I have heard that in my mind hundreds of times since, right? It's true. Building problems are nothing compared to people problems. People problems are hard. Our world has some very serious people problems right now, right? As Aaron mentioned 1 year ago today, or yesterday, a group of people were gathered in their sanctuary for a Bible study, kind of like what we're doing now, right? Charleston AME Church, when a 21-year-old white man named Dylan Roof shot and killed 9 people. And in his confession, he articulated his desire to incite a race war. He wanted to start a people problem. Now, on some level he did. He also just highlighted a tremendous race problem that we already had boiling all year long, right? I read a headline just this last week while we're still thinking about and running over what's happening to us. The headline said, why is a shooter called a terrorist or a thug when they're a person of color, but they're called mentally ill when the shooter is white? People problems are hard. As we were about to remember the shooting in Charleston, right, then we have a horrific massacre that occurred in Orlando. 49 people killed by a young man who apparently struggled with his own sexuality, we understand. He had documented history of anger and abuse. He had been on the watch list and then dismissed from that list by the FBI. And he was able to purchase 2 assault weapons, one of them that shoots 45 rounds a minute. Now, there are a lot of problems in that last paragraph that I just read. First, there are societal problems where homophobia has been accepted by leaders, both civic and religious leaders, and we have allowed violent communication to happen in any microphone. There are also governmental problems, right, in how people are examined and dismissed by the FBI. And then there are consumer problems, right, in the sale of arms. There's a lot of things going on there. And these problems, if you were watching the news at all this week, these problems all seem to come to a boil in Congress, right? So the House Democrats refused to recognize a moment of silence. It was incited by Representative Jim Himes, right, who incidentally is a Presbyterian elder. Himes went rogue on Twitter. I won't quote all of his tweets, but he clearly turned around the bend, like couldn't handle it anymore, right? A reporter asked him if prayer still mattered then, Mr. Himes, right? Does prayer have a role? And he said, of course it does. It's important to our spiritual lives to pray, but it's not enough. Prayer did not stop Orlando. And so he, along with many representatives, actually disrupted a moment of silence in Congress by calling out the names of people who were killed in Orlando. Now, his story, some of you are looking like, I didn't even hear that story. His story was overshadowed by his counterpart, Senator Chris Murphy, right, who held a 15-hour filibuster on the Senate floor that actually worked, which I think is hilarious. Politics is one of my favorite sports to watch, and filibusters don't work, right? Like, we know that from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. It's just like performance art. But not anymore, not after Thursday, right? Because Chris Murphy had a 15-hour filibuster, and all of a sudden, Congress is going to have 2 votes. We don't know how the votes will go, but they're going to vote on something. Oh my goodness, right? So while I'm happy to see our congressional leaders force legislative change that we have regarding violence, or gun laws, or ISIS, or terrorism, or whatever, I'm happy to see them move in some direction. I'm facing the reality, I think we're facing the reality that despite whatever legislation they want to do, we are still left with people problems. And I'm not sure that we can legislate ourselves out of people problems. Now we can, and we do. We turn our attention toward ISIS, or gun legislation, or bathroom laws, right? But at the end of the day, we are a society with broken relationships. We can add legislation all we want, but then we are still left with one another. And we have disappointed one another. We have hurt one another. We can change our military strategies or even build walls, right, in hope to defeat the bad guys or at least keep them out. But then we are left with one another, and we have hurt one another. We have disappointed one another. So I guess what I'm saying is that if we have people problems, then legislation and military strategies won't create peace. People create peace. People create peace by interacting with one another when they're different. People create peace when we build relationships with one another, when we listen to one another, when we figure out how to find empathy for someone we do not understand, when we compromise, when we forgive. That's what creates peace. Legislation doesn't heal discouragement or disappointment or anger or unforgiveness or broken relationships. Did you hear me? Legislation doesn't heal, right? We don't elect our officials to heal us. That's outside the scope of their job. I can appreciate that we're all really mad that they're not doing their job, and they might not be doing their job, but this isn't their job. We didn't elect them to heal us. People problems need healing, not fixing. So until we're able or willing or equipped to face the hurt that we have or the vulnerability that we have, the disappointment, then our people problems are just going to stay here. And so Paul's answer to his people problems was to name the problem without naming the person, right? Which makes it really great for us to listen to it. I think that's why these letters made the scriptures for us, right? Because they're just big enough that we go, oh yeah, I've been in broken relationships, right? So he names the problem, and he stays clear of it until they can face each other and forgive each other. So as much as I think seminary taught me I'm never allowed to do what Paul just did, right? He's got a point. Like, He's got a method that he thinks is going to work. I'm not coming until you fix it out. Fix it. You got a problem. Fix it. It's a people problem. I'm not making a rule for church for you. It's not going to fix the problem. What would it look like if our legislators did the same, right? What if they created opportunities for conversation across differences? What if they modeled conversation across differences so that we would know what it looks like, right? What if they actually debated on the floor, right? Which we've been saying for like 15 years, there's no more debate. Like even if we could watch it on C-SPAN, those of us who would care to watch it on C-SPAN, right? It would be interesting. How do you talk about it? How do you talk about it knowing you're talking to another person and not just an empty thing? That's what we watch now. They can say whatever they want, however they want, because no one's listening, right? But what if we had to actually talk to people that we disagree with, people who hurt us, people who we have hurt? It's really vulnerable then. That's very vulnerable conversation. Because we can't let our opponent have the microphone. I mean, we can't allow differences of opinions to be tolerated like that. I mean, this is the United States of America. We can laugh, right? It's so tragic, maybe we can laugh. Well, that's who we are. We're different. But we're afraid to give the other one a microphone. We're afraid to give it another opinion, some kind of voice out there. We can't allow differences. That would create mass chaos, right? That would create real people problems, as if we don't already have real people problems. So I was listening to this podcast of Brene Brown and Krista Tippett interviewing Brene Brown. Brene Brown says that every act of courage starts with our place of vulnerability. What does that mean? It essentially means that courageous acts, which would include listening or allowing the other to have a microphone or have their say. It includes reaching out even if you're not sure that the other one will grab your hand, right? Those are courageous acts. Courageous acts never happen when all of our ducks are in a row. Courageous acts always happen when we are vulnerable. That's what makes it courageous. That's why we think it's courageous, because we did something that was vulnerable. Not because we had power. If you have power, there's no courage in that. Paul encourages his community to be courageous in their relationships. He tells them to give freely, or forgive, which is the same word. Paul knows, and we know, that brokenness and hurt and disappointment, it all festers and then it spreads, right? And before you know it, personal problems turn into community problems, turn into societal problems. Paul says this is how Satan or Satan gets in, right? Satan, like I've said before, is not necessarily an entity or a person like Satan, right? Satan is anything that seeks to destroy. So broken relationships ultimately seek to destroy us all. But God, Paul's saying, works through us to create peace in us and around us. God works through us as the aroma of Christ, is how Paul ends this passage, right? If we spread love and joy and listening and forgiveness, if we build bridges, we spread the fragrance of God. So I've been really into oils lately. I've done this before. It was for a different passage. I couldn't remember why. Maybe one of you remember. It's not a test, nor will I love you any less or more. But this oil, when Moses came down from the mountain, this recipe was given to Moses from God. I'm not kidding. It's in the Bible. But Anyway, so if you want some, you can take some in your hand. It's just oil with essential oils, and you can pass it around if you want. If you want to touch one another. Baby girl. She gets extra. Pass around. Pass around. Smell it. It smells like cloves, right? Cloves and cinnamon. It smells like cloves. It smells like Christmas. So, now we have our modern brains, and we know that a lot of these scents, cinnamon cloves and some of these things are actually antibacterial, right? Antimicrobial. And so that's fun to see that there was a scriptural, the recipe truly is in the scriptures, but it's like by the vat. Like, Moses had to make vat of oil, right? Right? So I've been into these oils lately, and often, before I'll do ministry, I give the oils to the deacons too. Just stop and smell them, right? There are different kinds or whatever, and I'm happy to make you guys if you want any of your own little oils. But do you see how it changes? Right? We just change the smell of the room because we all have the smell, right? When we are loving, right? When we decide to face one another in relationships, especially across differences, when we choose to give freely, this is what we do to the world. We spread love like it's a fragrance. The fragrance of Christ comes from us doing this to one another. That's peacemaking, my friends. That is peacemaking. Amen.